On Monday, Pastor Mike Winger had a live broadcast where he was discussing Joel Osteen. And he was basically going through a sermon. And this bizarre chain of events unfolded from a random comment that Pastor Mike Winger made in this video. But hey, sometimes that's the way things work out. I'm Steve Perry. This is Biblical Anarchy. And today we are going to be taking a look at Psalm 22. Did they pierce my hands and my feet, or are they like a lion at my hands and feet? The reason why I want to take a look into this is kind of personal. So if you'll bear with me for a minute, I want to point out a few things here. This book here, this book here, this book here, this book, this, I don't know if these are going to be on the video down here, but Matthew Henry's Commentary, Nave's Topical Bible, Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, Hebrew Greek Key Study Bible, Commentary on the Book of Isaiah, Life and Epistles of St. Paul. These books I have had for 35 years anyway, and I'm 47 years old. Okay. I've had these books a long time, and I've been an atheist most of my life. I have the books because my parents saved them for me, but I was raised as a Christian. I was raised in a Christian church. My father was a pastor. I love my father. He's a great man. I wanted to grow up to be like him. I wanted to be a pastor. So I started getting these books and studying the Bible. Now, the problem was it didn't really make any sense to me. I would have probably identified as a Christian at the time, but I had no experience with Jesus. I had no real conversion story. I just figured, I guess I've been a Christian all my life. But when I turned 18, I joined the Marine Corps and decided I was an atheist. And I spent close to 30 years of my life as an atheist. Now, a few years back, I actually got this book, The Science of God by Gerald Schroeder. And this resolved some of the creation evolution problems that I had, but still, I was just disinterested, I guess you would say, in the things of God. I didn't think there was a God. I thought this book just made it plausible that there could be a God. Then I picked up here, the teachings of the Buddha. We got, the Daily Stoic. These were too big. I started kind of getting into Buddhism, Stoicism, but more from a philosophical standpoint. But in studying the teachings of Buddhism, I started noticing there's a lot of their teachings, and I'm not saying that these are in any way interrelated, but there's kind of a parallel between the words of Jesus and the teachings of the Buddha. Take up your cross and follow me. Think on heavenly things, not earthly things. These have a parallel. They're not, one to one, but it got me interested. So I picked up this Bible right here, which is a red letter edition, so that I could just read the red letters in the New Testament, not the stuff in Revelation, but in the Gospels, the things that Jesus was teaching while he was on earth. And, that kind of got me interested in things again. And even though I had problems in my mind, I was like, there's a lot of problems with Christian theology. That's fine. Around this time, this book here came out. Okay, this is a biography on the Apostle Paul by N.T. Wright. I've always found Paul to be fascinating. I actually got the audio book so I could listen to it while I drive. And this got me into the writings of Paul. Now, there's a thing, though. In this book, he opened my eyes to the idea that I'd never heard before, that Paul might not have written all of the Pauline epistles. Now, he defends a lot of them, Bishop Wright does. But 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, he doesn't defend in the book. He doesn't ever draw a conclusion, did Paul write them or not, but he just simply doesn't defend them, which leads you to believe that he might not think Paul wrote them. So I got this book, Forged, by a gentleman named Bart Ehrman. It talks about different New Testament books. Were they written by who they claim they were? I was interested in the ones written by Paul. Once I had come to a conclusion, Paul probably wrote these, Paul probably didn't write these, it got me interested. Hey, let me read everything Paul wrote and then read what he probably didn't wrote, see what the difference is if I get a different idea of what Paul's teaching based on this. That got me to read the rest of the New Testament. Somewhere along this process, I began to think, you know what? There might really be a God. I actually had two trains of thought in my mind going. And on one train, there was a God. On the other train, there wasn't. And I realized, I could jump ship. I could just cross the tracks. I could be on either train. There were days where I could literally talk about God as if he existed, but I could turn around 2 hours later and be like, but he doesn't exist. This is the thing I had going on. But all this on Paul got me into the whole New Testament. So I got this Bible here, which is a study Bible, so that I could cross-reference. And my parents picked me up this Bible. It's the Hebrew Greek keyword study Bible, Spiros Zodiatis. And this way I could do the word search. I actually have this one from when I was a kid, but it's a hardcover. They picked me up the leather bound. And now I was into studying and running into the old problems of the New Testament again. So when I finished the New Testament, I was really just going to put it down, but I decided, why not go ahead and read Tanakh? Or as I called it at the time, the Old Testament. Let me get a cup of my coffee. I'm going on. So I started reading the Old Testament and I started finding truth. And I was like, wait, this is what I've been looking for. Eventually, I came to realize I was a Noahide. I was a Gentile who was not going to convert to Judaism and follow the kosher laws and the full honoring of Shabbat and all the laws involved with that. Rather, I was a Gentile who was going to worship the God of Israel and follow the laws given to the nations, or as they're called, the 7 Noahide laws. But I had a problem. Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22. Now, full disclosure, I became a committed Noahide before I resolved Isaiah 53. I still had some problems there, but this Psalm 22 was a big one for me. Resolving this one really opened my eyes to how, I'm trying to word this carefully, how deceptive the Christian Bible can be. Now, I'm trying to word it. I don't want anybody to take offense to what I'm saying, okay? I don't think there's something nefarious here. I think that, especially from the people who teach it, your pastors, these are good people, and they're telling you what they honestly believe. And I think that most Christians honestly believe that Psalm 22 is about Jesus. We're going to be taking a look today at two pastors, two doctors, two Christian theologians, Dr. James White and Dr. Michael Brown, who are going to defend, they pierced my hands and my feet. However, I spent hours digging into this one because it was of vital importance to me. Am I going the right way or the wrong way? You understand what I'm saying? Like, I was raised in Christianity. This should be the right way, yet I'm going this other way. I want to get to the bottom of this. The rabbis are saying it's like a lion at my hands and my feet. The pastors are saying they pierced my hands and my feet. So I spent hours studying this one. And I came to my own conclusion, and I'm going to give you the information that I came up with today, and you're going to come to your own conclusion. You might think, Steve, you're crazy, or you might think, wow, Steve, you really nailed it. It's fine. I'm not going to try to make you see it the way I see it. I just want you to have the information that I had that caused me to disagree with these two gentlemen. And they're not being dishonest with you. This is just the way they see it. I see it differently. So what got me on this kick is this video by Mike Winger, and he makes this offhanded comment. Like, it really shouldn't have resulted in anything, but...
Is this true? Was it, actually wrong for, Jesse to leave David in the fields? This is where David wrote the Psalms. He wrote the Psalms when he was in the fields. He learned to use the sling. These things were kind of important, and he never complains about it. He writes, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." He wouldn't have wrote that if he hadn't been a shepherd.
David would have never wrote "The Lord is my shepherd" if he had not been a shepherd. Now, this is one of the things that Christians kind of a problem that you run into. So when you're reading the Gospels, are they the Word of God, or are they the eyewitness accounts of people who were there? And this James White, one of the guys that can be on here today, he completely rejects this whole minimal facts argument. And this is why, because he says it's the Word of God. It's not eyewitness accounts, right? There may be eyewitness accounts in there, but the authors are only giving you what the Holy Spirit has breathed out, what he's told them to give you. So you can't just view it as historical accounts. It's minimizing it. Well, Pastor Mike Winger is a guy who does use a historical account narrative, but the notion that David is just writing about his personal life experiences in the Psalms is something that I believe. I don't think he's writing prophecies, although these are prayers that they'll have application on down the line. Many people will find comfort in Psalm 23. And God is going to provide for me. He's going to lead me like a sheep. He's going to lead me to water. He's going to provide for my needs. I'm going to dwell in the house of Hashem forever. I'm going to be in church so much, or synagogue so much, or temple so much. I'm going to be there so much that people are like, what does this guy live there? Are they charging him rent? Right? This is things you can get from the Psalms, but they're coming from David's personal experiences. But what about Psalm 22? This is a big one. Now, I want to point out that the argument that these two gentlemen are making here today doesn't really apply to your version of the Bible. Why do I say that? Well, I use the ESV. A lot of people do. And if we go into if you're a geek like me and you read the preface to the ESV, they're going to tell you that in the Old Testament, or Tanakh, they use the Masoretic text. However, in exceptional difficult cases, and I'm quoting here from the preface to the ESV, in exceptional difficult cases, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Septuagint, the Samaritan Pentateuch, the Syriac Peshitta, and the Latin Vulgate and other sources were consulted to shed possible light on the text, or, if necessary, to support a divergence from the Masoretic text. So what they're telling you here in the ESV is that they're relying on the Masoretic text, but there's times where they think there's a problem with the Masoretic text, and they are then going outside of the Masoretic text. Now, the argument that Dr. Michael Brown is presenting here today is based on the word karu. This would come from about maybe a dozen, I think he says, of the Masoretic texts. I'll explain that later. And it would come from a Dead Sea Scroll. But here the ESV is saying, hey, when we had a problem, we consulted those documents. And if you go to the ESV, and let's do that right now, in Psalm 22:16, we can look here and see that the word that they use, and I'm clicking to the interlinear here, the word that they're translating is kaari, not karu. So they are going with the Masoretic text, yet they translate it, they pierced. Well, we're all in agreement that kaari means like a lion. Ari is lion, ka is a prefix that means like. So kaari means like a lion. They are not arguing in this video anything differently. They're not arguing that kaari means pierced, yet for some reason, the ESV uses the Hebrew word kaari and translates it as pierced. Now, we can come over here to, I have Logos Bible software here. So coming over to Logos Bible software, we can look and see that this word appears 23 times, I believe it is here. It's only translated as pierced here. Everywhere else, this word is translated as lion or lions or like a lion. It's just not, that's not an accurate way to translate this word. So the argument that they're making here is that the underlying Hebrew word should be karu, but in the ESV, for example, they're conceding that the word is kaari, but yet they're translating it they pierce. So this argument doesn't really defend the ESV, and it certainly doesn't defend the King James Version, which was translated long before we had this Dead Sea Scroll. But it's just, it's a problematic defense for that reason. It can defend why the translation could be, but it's doing so based on a word, and the translators don't agree that that's the correct word. They do not agree with Dr. Michael Brown here. Instead, they agree with me, I guess you could say, but they agree with the vast majority of the Masoretic texts, plural, which go with kaari. So Michael Brown here is arguing that the word instead of kaari, which would be like a lion, should be karu. Here's how he makes his argument.
But there are strong Jewish reasons for questioning if that is the right text. And so the evidence that we have, the oldest Hebrew manuscript carrying this psalm from the Dead Sea Scrolls does not read kaari with a final yud, but karu. The letters are very close. One is just longer than the other, final vav versus final yud. And karu could mean to dig through, to bore through, hence to pierce. The Septuagint, which is the oldest translation we have of the Hebrew into another language, reads, they pierced. And then we talk about the Masoretic text as if there was just one text. There's the Masoretic textual tradition with thousands and thousands of manuscripts. And there are about a dozen of them that have variant readings and read karu or kaaru, which again would be saying that the reading that we have from the Dead Sea Scrolls is even preserved in medieval Hebrew manuscripts. So this is an entirely Jewish translation issue. It has nothing to do with later Christians changing anything. It's simply a matter of saying which is the most accurate original Jewish text, and you could make a strong argument for something they dug through, they bore through, they pierced as being the original Hebrew reading.
Okay, so this is the argument that he's making. This isn't the argument. The ESV is not saying that the word is ka'aru, as I've just showed you. They're saying the word is ka'ari. Now, he says ka'aru could mean to bore through, to dig, but what does he mean? It could mean that. What does the word mean? Well, the simple answer is it doesn't mean anything because it's not a word. The word here is not ka'aru. We can all agree on that because ka'aru isn't a word. So the word they're going for is karu. And if we look at Psalm 57 verse 6, we have the word karu. It's translated, they dug, karu, a pit in my way. Now, this is Psalm 57, verse 6. We can click on the word karu here because it might be of interest to you. It might not be. Is the word karu ever translated as pierced in the English Standard Version? The answer, as you can see on your screen, is no. It's never. Now, the reason why I say this might interest you, there's a real irony here. My significant other is a Christian. This actually turned out to be a big deal to her. She's like, well, it's never translated. Why would they? It's not a big deal to me. And here's why it's not. We go to Proverbs 16:27. It says, a worthless man, karu, evil. A worthless man, what? Evil? What is he? He digs evil? He bores through evil? Is that what well, no, obviously it's kind of like he digs his own grave kind of thing. Like he plans evil. So that's how they translate it. A worthless man plots evil. The word there is karu. How else would you translate that? Likewise, when it comes to my hands and my feet, can I dig, like get a shovel and dig through my hands and my feet? Or you could argue open. That's another way karu is translated. But is in this Psalm 22 in its context, is a guy just opening his hands like his hands are closed and now obviously not. So I don't have a problem. If the word is karu, I don't have a problem with it being they pierced. I really don't. I would think that that's a good translation if the word is karu. And ironically, as I said, I'm a Noahide. I should be the guy saying, it's never translated pierce. It's actually my Christian wife who seems to have a problem. I don't want to speak for her, but she seemed to really question that. And to me, it wasn't a big deal. Now, he keeps saying the Masoretic texts. And that is correct. I don't dispute that at all. It's actually thousands of scrolls, folks. Why? Well, because every synagogue has their own scroll. And back then, they're copied by hand. There's no printing press, right? So we have all these different scrolls that are hand copied. You're going to have variations between some of them. The problem that I have is through this entire video, they represent the Septuagint, And they never make this point about the Septuagint, but the fact of the matter is the same thing is true about the Septuagint. The Septuagint, this is from Logos Bible Software, and I use them because Dr. White happens to use Logos. I know that he does. I've seen it on his screen. And here's what Logos Bible Software says on their academic blog. This isn't some, opinion blog article somebody wrote. This is on the academic side. The best way to begin an essay on the Septuagint is with the statement that there is really no such thing as the Septuagint. Why? They go on to say, to further complicate things, the 70 translators only produced the Pentateuch in Greek, as far as we know, while the rest of the Hebrew Bible was edited and revised anonymously over the next 300 years. Edited and revised anonymously. In other words, it ain't the 70 rabbis that did the rest of Tanakh. They did the Pentateuch, Torah, 5 books of Moses, whatever you want to call them. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Notice I didn't say Psalms. These are the ones that are done by the rabbis. So the effort that they're going to here to say that this is produced by the Jews, right? Well, yes, that was. But what the problem is that we wind up wrapping all this stuff into the Septuagint. And if you go online, the argument gets even worse. And I'm going to link you to this down below. This is from the preface. We just looked at the preface to the ESV. We're going to look at the preface to the Septuagint after this clip.
Now, is it the position of some of the Jewish apologists that the Greek Septuagint is Christian in origin rather than Jewish?
You have some. This is not a scholarly perspective. This is a counter-missionary perspective, which often is scholarly, but sometimes is not. So according to rabbinic tradition, it was only the 5 books of Moses in the Septuagint that were supernaturally inspired and in perfect agreement, which of course we know is not the case anyway.
Right.
And that the rest of it is not to be used and it's full of error. And then some would even try to argue that Septuagint manuscripts as we have today reflect Christian interpolations and so on, so that the Septuagint, where it seems to read in harmony with Christian views, is because later Christians changed that. But that's not the view of Septuagint scholars. That's not the view of the academic community, which recognizes that Septuagint, say Septuagint of the Psalms, is completed somewhere in the 3rd century BC.
Right. So this is a Jewish production, known primarily through Christian copying later on, historically speaking, but it was originally a Jewish production.
Originally a Jewish production, if you're going with the Torah. The rest of it, we're not really sure. But here is from the Septuagint online. Here's from the preface to the Septuagint. I'm going to link it down below. And this is going to take a minute. This is a little bit of a long read, but in the 3rd century, the great Christian scholar Origen, now he lived until 255. So the great Christian scholar Origen, keenly interested in the textual differences between the Hebrew and the Greek, set out to arrange the church's Old Testament in 6 columns. I'm not going to get to all 6, but one of them is a Septuagint. The volumes were compiled in Caesarea between 230 and 240 of the Common Era, a project funded by Origen's patron. The resultant work, called the Hexapla, sixfold, was massive and has perished except for fragments. Origen was a very careful scholar, but he did not observe modern editorial conventions. His version of the LXX, that's the Septuagint, draws from several different manuscript families and embraces readings that bring the text closer to the Hebrew text of his day. Thus, this 5th LXX column, while establishing the first standardized text of the Christian church, and pay attention to this line, created problems for modern scholars who would seek to recover a pre-Christian version of the LXX. Interesting. Further recensions of the Greek text in the 4th century are attested. They go through them here. The part I'm going to focus on. Thus, we find some Greek church fathers quoting the same Old Testament text, but in very different forms. There is no indication, however, that this troubled church leadership. The insistence on letter-for-letter, word-for-word accuracy in the scriptures was a feature that was not to emerge in Christian thought for many centuries, and only then after a similar instance appeared in Judaism and Islam. As far as most early Christians were concerned, any Greek version of the Old Testament read in the church merited the term Septuagint. So to sit there and say that this is a production of the Jews is misleading. it can accurately be said because the Torah, how did this all get started, was with the 70 rabbis translating the Torah from Hebrew into Greek. But it became a much bigger thing, and it's not what it is today, folks. And as the Septuagint itself attests, the scholars who put it together in their preface, they say it creates problems for modern scholars who would seek to recover a pre-Christian version of the LXX. In other words, the version you go and buy in your bookstore today. You can buy an English translation of the Septuagint in a bookstore. You can get it online at Amazon, whatever the case may be. But that is a Christian production. That is not a Jewish production. This is not a fair representation of what the Septuagint is that you're getting here. And again, these guys aren't trying to mislead you. Everything they said is true in a context. But to apply it to the larger context of these texts, it's not true. So when I was diving into this, this was something that was important to me. So I went online, and I'm going to put this link down below as well. You can find University of Pennsylvania has a list of ancient LXX manuscripts that have been discovered. Psalm 22, if we look on the list here, it isn't represented until the late 3rd century, and Origen died in the year 255. In other words, we can't really get a good view of what the Septuagint was before the Christians edited it, and we do not have any copy of Psalm 22 from the Septuagint, a Greek translation of Psalm 22 that predates Origen. That's a huge problem. Now, we're going to get to look at the text itself. He's going to put it up at the video, and I'm going to put a screenshot of it up afterwards, so here we go.
And so what people need to understand is when we mentioned one of the most ancient manuscripts of this particular section, I have it here. We can put it up on the screen. What you were pointing to was the final form. I'll sort of actually, you can see that. Look at that. You can see the form here, and the best way of reading that actually fits with the Greek Septuagint reading, which has oruxon, which means to dig. At this particular text, to dig or to pierce. And so if this was not a matter of dispute in Jewish apologetics or in Islamic apologetics, if this was a some other subject that didn't have a whole lot of significance to it, everybody would look at it and go, oh, here's a place where the Greek Septuagint is indicating that its source material, its tradition, is one of those places where it differs from the Masoretic and, in fact, may go earlier than the Masoretic history.
Now, see what they're saying here is we don't have a Hebrew text that says this. Now, again, there are a couple Masoretic ones that say karu, but the karu, the dig, we don't have it, but apparently the Septuagint had it, and this Dead Sea Scroll apparently had it. But I'm going to throw this image up on your screen. This is a screenshot of what's on there, and I have added to it. Now, unfortunately, I've mentioned this before, at Logos, I have reverse interlinears, so they follow the English order. So I went up on the top right, I put up a, like a lion, where I edited that to put it together in the correct order of the Hebrew as opposed to the English. And so to the left, we have kaari, and to the right, we have karu. Obviously, we're all in agreement that the scribe was trying to write one of these two words. Well, the problem is, if we go with karu here, why is this aleph in the word? Why is this letter, this character, why is this here? It shouldn't be there, right? If he's trying to write karu. However, if he's trying to write kaari, if we look over here, this should look like this, but the line comes down a little further, which makes it look like a vav. I'm not debating that. It looks more like a vav than a yod. Absolutely. But as he mentions, there are 12 different Masoretic texts that have this same issue. So now we have 13 scribes. Let me flip my hourglass so I don't lose clock. We have 13 scribes who all made the same error. And they made one of two errors. Either they randomly inserted an aleph into the word karu, or they drew the line down a little too far on their yod at the end of kaari. It's one of two errors. Now, I have to believe, if I'm going to go with their version of the story, I have to believe that 13 scribes all randomly inserted the exact same letter at the exact same point in the exact same word mistakenly. And remember, this isn't a spelling error as in, how do you spell this word? It's right in front of them. Okay? They're copying it over. Is it more reasonable to believe that they drew this line on this letter right here a little too long? Or is it more reasonable to believe that they all accidentally inserted the exact same character into the exact same place of the exact same word in the exact same scroll? You decide. Again, this is what the conclusion that I had to come to. For me, it was much more reasonable to conclude that they probably all made the same error and drew the line a little too long.
But let me remind everybody what you pointed out from the beginning. The New Testament doesn't cite this verse.
And that, folks, is the icing on the cake as far as I'm concerned. No New Testament author cites this verse. And it's not that Psalm 22, it's not like it was a lost psalm. Everybody had forgotten about it. They reference Psalm 22 all the time. In fact, when we get down into Mark, into his account of the crucifixion, he pulls all kinds of stuff, like from Psalm 22. He's reading Psalm 22, and Jesus on the cross, according to Mark, says, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's from Psalm 22. So now Mark's going through Psalm 22, and he's finding these parallels. Like they divided my clothing, they cast lots for them. There's a bunch of these parallels that are taken directly out of Psalm 22 and used in the crucifixion scene. Things as minor as they wagged their heads at me. That comes from Psalm 22. Yet Mark, as he scrolls down through Psalm 22, pun intended, he gets to, they pierced my hands and my feet, and he goes, I don't really see anything there. I don't know what I would use there to draw a parallel to the crucifixion. Are you kidding me? This is what I'm supposed to believe? That it said they pierced my hands and my feet as the New Testament is being written. This is 1,000 years, folks. This is David. This is 1,000 years before the crucifixion of Jesus. David writes in a psalm that will later be used to talk about the crucifixion of Jesus. David writes, they pierced my hands and my feet. Every New Testament author has access to this psalm, and not a single one of them, the light bulb goes off. Hey, maybe that's talking about Jesus. Come on now. This is what I'm supposed to believe? Or should I believe that it said kaari all along and that someone later changed it to they pierced? And that, of course, we have this yod that looks more like a vav. And so we do have some texture. I'm not saying that they have no basis for what they're saying here. You can make the argument. But the question is, which argument is more reasonable? Is it more reasonable that no New Testament author saw any kind of a parallel between they pierced my hands and my feet and the crucifixion? But what really, before I get to that, I think I got one more.
What would have been a greater proof that, like many other people at the edge of death, got delivered last minute? Maybe there was a reprieve and they weren't executed. Maybe some people came and rescued them. Maybe they escaped. Somehow they were delivered from the jaws of death. That, or you actually die a horrific death and 3 days later rise from the dead, never to die again. As we go to the end of the psalm, to just say, okay, they almost killed me. I was at the edge of death. I thought God had abandoned me, but at the last minute he came through and he saved me. That is not going to result in the ends of the earth turning to God and worshiping
the
him.
Argument here, folks, is that that it's a better fulfillment than what you get in Psalm 22, right? You could say that. I mean, in Christian theology, it certainly is a better fulfillment. The problem is, better by what standard? Because the best prophetic fulfillment is when what you say in a prophecy is what actually happens. Otherwise, the prophecy isn't actually fulfilled. So we run into this problem where we look at quotes, and here we go. This is from Psalm 22, where he survives, right? He doesn't die. But you, O Hashem, do not be far off. O you, my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. You have rescued me from the horns of the wild oxen. And if you read on, we see that whoever's being talked about here survives the event. But Dr. Brown responds and says, well, that's not a very good fulfillment. Well, it's an excellent fulfillment of the prophecy if the person survives, if God comes to the rescue. But he says later in the psalm, we have the psalmist saying, all the nations are going to turn to God over this. And that wouldn't happen if God just stepped in and saved his life at the last minute. And James White agrees with him, folks. This is where the Mike Winger clip ties it all together. This random thing that Mike Winger said, and I had not considered this previously.
Is this true? Was it actually wrong for Jesse to leave David in the fields? This is where David wrote the Psalms. He wrote the Psalms when he was in the fields. He learned to use the sling. These things were kind of important, and he never complains about it. He writes, "The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want." He wouldn't have wrote that if he hadn't been.
This is where David writes the Psalms, and I'm thinking of David and Goliath because this is what was being discussed in the Joel Osteen sermon. I want you to listen to this because Dr. Michael Brown says that this just, wouldn't be fulfilled without Jesus' death and the resurrection. Listen to this, folks. This is 1 Samuel 17:46 through 47. This day, and this is David speaking to Goliath, this day Hashem will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is Hashem's, and he will give you into our hand. Ladies and gentlemen, that to me, go on and read more from this account. 1 Samuel 17:37. The Hashem who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And what do we read again in Psalm 22? You saved me from the mouth of the lion. You have rescued me from the horns of the wild oxen. These parallels are striking between, I had always previously just assumed that David had wrote Psalm 22 while on the run from King Saul or from his son Absalom. I don't think that anymore. This offhanded comment by Mike Winger just drew my mind to David and Goliath in Psalm 22, and the parallels are striking. Everybody's mocking David. His brother, go back and take care of those few sheep you've got out in the wilderness. Saul himself, you're a kid. This guy's been a warrior from his youth. You're still a youth. Everybody's mocking David. They all think he's going to die. Is it crazy to go so far as to say that the Philistines were probably casting lots for, hey, when he kills this guy, I got his spear. Oh, I got his slingshot. I got his anybody got dibs on the jacket? Let's draw lots for the jacket, right? This is a perfect parallel, folks. When you read 1 Samuel chapter 17 and you get the account of David and Goliath and you compare it to Psalm 22, it is a perfect parallel. But here's the thing. Psalm 22 actually does have good parallels to the crucifixion as well. Why? Well, because it's a prayer for anyone who's going through that hard time in their life. And you feel like you've been forsaken by all your friends and people are mocking you and even God has forgotten about you, right? But yet you have that spark of faith down in you. God's going to come through. He's going to pull me through this thing. And this is a prayer that anybody can pray when they're going through a hard time in their life. And there certainly is application to Jesus. I am not trying to take this psalm away from Jesus. I just wanted to get to the bottom of this. Because if this psalm is a prophecy of the crucifixion, then how do you get around the crucifixion, right? How do you get around Jesus? From a person who was raised a Christian, but is now a Noahide, this was huge. If I could not get around this one, how can I in good faith be a Noahide? And the fact is, you don't even really have to get around it. You just have to accept it. for what it says. They are like a lion on my hands and my feet. You disagree with me? Leave a comment down below. And I say that for a reason, because if you have good evidence that shows me that I'm wrong, I want to know about it. Put it in a comment down below. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, share it on social media, subscribe to the channel, but don't just sit there. Do something.